Siman Nun Dalet. It is what we started. We're on Seif Gimel. Maran writes, "En la not amen." המספר בין השתבח ליוצר, עבירה היא בידו וחוזר עליה מאורחי המלחמה, that even though that after השתבח you have already concluded your Psukei Zimra officially, you still have not started the brachot of Kriyat Shema, so that middle point is a little bit more kal, is a little bit more lenient, as we're going to see. There are exceptions to the rule that if you didn't have talit and tefillin, you could stop and say bracha there. Other leniencies, as we're going to see in the Ramah, but nevertheless, Maran writes, still you cannot speak just freely there in between Ishtabach and Yotzer, the end of Psukei Zimra, prior to Birkot Kriyat Shema. And if somebody speaks, it's an Avera, and it's sufficient enough of an Avera that you would come back from Orchei Milchama, as we mentioned, the Gemara in Sota, Daf Membet, writes that a person that was scared that his Avera is going to cause his demise and death in the battlefield, who will come back from the battlefield. And what is considered enough of an Avera for a person to come back from Orchei Milchama? Somebody that speaks between Ishtabach and Yotzer. That's enough of an Avera that the person would come back. Chozer alea me'orchei milchama ra'is Shulchan Aruch. V'yesh mi she'omer she'lo tzibur o l'sok tzedakah or למי שבא להתפרנס מן הצדקה, מותר להפסיק. There are those who say for tzorchei mitzvah, for communal needs, or someone that needs to get parnasa and tzedakah from the tzibur, you could make an appeal in the tzibur for him to be able to get tzedakah from the community. That Maran brings as yesh omrim. Now the Haggah, before we read the comments of the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Yisraeli and Shulchan Aruch, Kaf HaChaim writes that even lechatchila, you shouldn't even pause between Ishtabach and Yotzer. Even though that you're not talking, but that also is some level of hefsek, some level of division that you're putting, just sitting there doing nothing and not talking, but you're also just passage of time by itself is some level of hefsek. So the lechatchila, if you could plan it properly, that you shouldn't have any hefsek between Ishtabach and Yotzer, that really is the proper thing to be done, and a person should do that to ensure that they're not pausing at all. Now the Ramah writes, "Umizen nitpashet ma shena'agu beharbe mekomot levarech chole o likvol bebet hakneset." There are many places that have a custom that someone that has a monetary complaint on someone and has not been answered, the individual has been ignoring him, he comes to the shul and starts yelling or starts complaining in the middle of tefillah between Ishtabach and Yotzer. He waits for them to finish Ishtabach and he goes up on the bima and says, Rabotai, Reuben has stolen my money, has not paid back, whatever it is. Or the Gabbai would do that. There are communities who have this as a communal pressure. You know, the sense of community, I just want to open a very important short parenthesis. We don't recognize and realize how important community is. Community is everything. Nowadays, unfortunately, the unit of what's considered family is diminishing. The community as a whole is diminishing, because if you have a community that people belong to, the standards that are created by community then mean something. If you are floating around and you don't have a community, then you don't benefit from those standards that the community in a healthy way has to offer. But it also helps to uphold standards of humanity within the community. For instance, if somebody does not divorce their wife nowadays, right? You have unfortunate cases. I'm involved with 3 of them currently, that unfortunately the husband has left the wife and refrains to give a get, right? So in Eretz Yisrael, you have a system that the judicial system actually could force them to do it, otherwise they will be jailed. So it's a little easier to deal with it. But in a regular community, you would have a ktav siruv. You would push them and press them communally, and they would do it. Because if you say you can't come to the shul, you can't go to the community, so then they would not want to be excommunicated, and that's sufficient pressure usually for a regular person to say, you know what, why do I need this? Do it. Nowadays, they just go to a different different shul. Different shul stops them, they go to Chabad, right? No one's going to stop them in Chabad. Like, no one even knows them. The unit of community has suffered in that way, and it goes with with other elements of raising children, shalom bayit, many other aspects as well. So therefore, many communities develop this as their way of being able to pressure people who are not conducting within the accepted standard of community, and the time to do it would be when people are in the shul. At the end of the shul, or in the beginning, not everyone is there, but in the middle, everyone's there. So that's the Ramah that some communities have developed a custom that they will allow someone to voice their complaints against somebody else, because that is a function of community. Says the Ramah, all of these is considered sorach mitzvah. The daven for a chole, or to have people voice their complaints. But afterwards, when you go back to davening, she gets has to say some psukim of shevach, of zimra, then you could say kaddish, because we always have before kaddish psukim of shevach and hoda'atu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the reason that Arvit, at least the Ashkenazim, Arvit, they start with Ve'urachum, right? Ve'urachum, and then Baruch Hu Hashem Vorach without the Kaddish, says the Ramah, right? The reason the Arvit starts without Kaddish is because you have nothing before it. Of course, the Sfaradim always come up with a creative way to create an opportunity for Kaddish. So you say a bright tie, you say something, but that is the reason that we are allowed to say Kaddish. So says the Ramah, doesn't end there. Imagine you didn't have tzitzit or tefillin, or many right now in the winter time, that the Netzach Hama is very late. People who have to be at work very early in the morning. So let's imagine they are davening before Mishiakir, right? It's starting tefillah before Mishiakir. Now Mishiakir, I'm not sure what time it is. Netz is I think 6:38, 39. Is Netzach Hama. So when Mishiakir is before 6 o'clock, for instance, after 6 o'clock, for instance, then you're starting at 6 o'clock minyan. What do you got to do? You can't put on talit and tefillin before Mishiakir. So those minyanim, they start davening Baruch Sha'amar without talit and tefillin, and they get to Yishtabach. They finish Yishtabach. They could put on their talit and tefillin and say bracha on it. You could put them on and say bracha on them. Now, this that I said, you could say bracha on them. Going with the Ramah, halachically between Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, there's a whole machloket. If tzitzit and tefillin, both of them you could say bracha on, or you wait. You would put them on and we'll wait for after tefillah to say bracha. We'll discuss those details. Aval ben kaddish lebarechu lo yafsik b'shuma. But after kaddish, between Barechu and Kaddish, after Kaddish, before Barechu, lo yafsik b'shum davar. You shouldn't pause it with anything. Of course, you cannot stop and pause after you answer Barechu before you start Yotzer. Right? After you answer Baruch Hashem, that already is in middle of, it's considered in middle of, Birkat Kriyat Shema, and you cannot pause and be mafsik. Says the Mishna Berurah. Ubaktavim, the Marchu, Reb Chaim Vital, in Kitvei Arizal, this is in Pri Etz Chaim. The Pri Etz Chaim writes לומר בעשרת ימי תשובה, מזמור מעמקים קראתיך השם. So Shira Malod Makim Kratich Hashem after Yishtabach, before Kaddish. And Mishna Berurah says, Sarich Iyun, not so simple, not so fast. Sarich Iyun, he says, I'm not sure if that is sufficient reason to say, to be said and not be considered hefsek, but the Kaf HaChaim says that Sarich Iyun, that he says over here, means if it's mutar to be mafsik between Yishtabach and Yotzer with saying this mizmor, because it's an avera to speak between Yishtabach and Yotzer. But the Maaseh, Kaf HaChaim says you should say it. You should say it because Ariya Kadosh held like that, and Omar who brings it, and our minhaget tefillah follow to some extent, to a great degree, the minhagim of Ariya Kadosh, and therefore he says to say it. Chacham Obadia also agrees with that. In Yabya Omer Chelek Bet Siman Dalit in Orach Chaim, and a person that has already answered the Barechu, they write in the name of Hakadosh Hagaon Chacham Obadia that he should also say the Mizmor still. In other words, even if you said Barechu et Hashem HaMevorach, Baruch Hashem HaMevorach Olam Va'ed, he still to say the Mizmor of So says the Mishna Berurah, back to Chafetz Chaim. This that the person that speaks and pauses between Yishtabach and Yotzer has enough of an avera that will come back from waging war. It says in the pasuk, and the Gemara in Sotah that we mentioned brings this. Whoever is afraid, you could go back home, and Chazal say again. This is Gemara in Sotah. This is someone that's afraid of the averot that he has in his hands. And this is also considered on an avera that he would come back from it from Orchei Milchama. So says the Mishna Berurah. The Eliyarabba says, in the name of Matei Moshe, that the person that speaks between Yishtabach and Yotzer, the tum'ah that he creates stops the tefillah from being accepted. The Ayin Kaman B'Siman Samechtet Mash Katav Nusham Bazeh. He says later on we'll discuss this a little bit more. He says the klipot are mebatel the tefillah, and through the Pesukei Zimra machritim otam. The Eliyarabba writes that Pesukei Zimra is milashon lezamer. It's the language of lezamer. Lezamer means to weed out. To weed out. By Pesukei Zimra, you are weeding out all of the klipot, all of the mekatragim, all the negative forces of tum'ah, in order to create a pathway for the tefillah, a straight path for the tefillah to be accepted and go up. And when he speaks between Yishtabach and Yotzer, all of those klipot come back because of the avera that he just did in the process of tefillah. And that's the language of Orchei Milchama. It says those warriors of Tum'ah that fight your tefillah from being accepted, all of them, all of those come back. This that some kilot have a minhag to give tzedakah. Any dvar mitzvah is included, is not just giving tzedakah, but any dvar mitzvah is included in that as well, which Chacham Obadia also says it the same way. But Kaf HaChaim disagrees. He says you should be mahmir not to speak between Yishtabach and Yotzer, even for dvar mitzvah. Even for a mitzvah, you should not speak, because it's a big deal. It's something that you don't want to stop between Yishtabach and Yotzer. The Shaliach Tzibur should go back and say some Pesukei Zimra, and the Mishna Berurah writes, "Ve'im lo amar psukim lo yomar kaddish." If you didn't say the psukim after you stopped and paused and talked, you should not say Kaddish afterwards. Rak yatchil baruchu velo Kaddish. You should start baruchu without a Kaddish. שלעולם לא תמצא קדיש בלי פסוקים שלפניו, because you will never find Kaddish without psukim prior to it, and because of that, Kaf Chaim writes that you cannot say Kaddish after Brit Milah without saying some Mizmor. The reason that we say the Mizmor after Brit Milah, the Ashkenazim say Alelu L'Shabeach, that has become their minhag. The Sfaradim say Shir Ma'alot, Ashrei Kol Yirei Hashem, Ha'olech B'drachav, V'shtecha K'gof B'Poriya, V'Yakte B'techa, V'chulei V'chulei, and then they say Kaddish Yeshalama. The reason that we say the pasuk is you're saying a mizmor that relates to family and to children, but really it's because you want to say Kaddish afterwards, and you can't say Kaddish without saying some psukim prior to it. Says the Mishna Berurah, Im lo hashaliach tzibur achar chazarat tefillah o belachash ba'arvit shakadish kai ala tefillah. The exception to that rule is the Shliach Tzibur that says Kaddish after Tefillah, because that Tefillah goes back on, that Kaddish goes back on the Tefillah, that you daven, the Lachash, so therefore you say it without any psukim, you just say Kaddish after either Tefillah B'Arvit or after Chazarat HaShas. Belo Tehillah, that without having a praise, you don't say Kaddish. Says Mishna Berurah, or achar tefillah. It's either tehillah or tefillah. Either you have to say some psukim of shevach, or after tefillah of Shemona Esrei, as we mentioned, or Chosh Katav b'Seif Kadar Kodem. V'chen achar shelamat eze inyan mitorash bal peh. Same is if you learned already torash bal peh, then you could say Kaddish al-Baran, you could say Al Yisrael, and that's the reason that we say whenever we have doubt, we say Rabbi Hananiah ben Achashah Omer Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu Zakod Yisrael, because it's a bright time, and you say Kaddish immediately afterwards, and they write in the name of Chacham Ovadia that you cannot finish the limud in the kollel or in the yeshiva without saying Kaddish L'Rabbanan. You have to say Kaddish L'Rabbanan after any limud that you have in the Seder HaYeshiva or Seder of the kollel. Sharei Amru Chazal, שהעולם עומד על קדיש הנאמר אחר לימוד התורה שבעל פה, because Chazal teach us that the world stands on the Kaddish D'Rabbanan that you say after learning. That's the Gemara in Sota also, in Daf Memtet, and therefore it's important to keep in mind to say Kaddish. Now this is something that not every kollel or yeshiva is careful in, again, given that the kollel has a minyan after every seder, then after you learn, you say Rabbi Hananiah, and you say Kaddish. After second seder is the same thing. And in the yeshivot, that's something that it's not necessarily the minhag of everyone, but it's something to be mindful. Again, when you have a Mishna Berurah class, even keep minyan there in order to be able to say Kaddish afterwards. Hamadia writes that's a very important thing to be mindful and to be careful. This is again the shiurim that Chacham used to give on Motzei Shabbat. This is one of the shiurim that he mentioned. This is what he said there. Afterwards, he says some Agadah, some Divrei Torah, and afterwards you could say Kaddish. The Ikar is on Divrei Agadah, and therefore after Pirkei Avot and after Madlikin, they say Rabbi Hananiah ben Achashah Omer, because that's considered Divrei Agadah, right? That's the Gemara in Makot, at the end of Makot, that's Chaf Gimel Amud Bet. That's considered right. That's Divrei Agadah, and you could say Kaddish on that, or you could say Amar Elazar, Amar Chaynat, Aminach Chaim Avim Shalom Ba'olam, which is what we say, after Madlikin, right? Because though that's also considered Divrei Agadah, that you could say Kaddish afterwards, right? So that's the two Masechtot. That's one of them is at the end of Masechet Makot, Chaf Gimel, as we mentioned, Amud Bet, and the other one is in Masechet Brachot, Daf Samach Dalet, at the end of Masechet Brachot, Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam. לפי זה, יש להיזהר כשלומדים משניות, יאמרו בסוף הלימוד, המאמר רבי חנניה בר רשע אומר. You learn משניות, at the end you say רבי חנניה בר רשע אומר, to have some אגדה, this way, כדי שיהיו יכולים לומר על זה, אחר כך קדיש דרבנן. This way you could say קדיש דרבנן, and after Tanakh we say קדיש, קדיש שלם, which the Kaf HaChaim says that after the Kaddish, we say the pasuk of Utshuat Tzadikim Ma'Hashem v'chuleh, that's after this Kaddish the Mishna Berurah mentions over here, and Be'ezrat Hashem we will continue in the days to come.